Tonight, we are talking the US-Israel relationship, and we have a fabulous guest joining us live. It is A.J Edelman. A lot of you might know A.J from the Olympics. It is not often that A.J gets to host a real-life Israeli Olympic athlete. But he's not here to talk about the Olympics tonight. He's here to talk about his role in advocating and supporting the state of Israel. We're talking about the recent changes, what this means for the long-standing and crucial friendship between the US and Israel. And we're having a personal insight into AJ's journey from Olympian to Israeli advocate across campuses in America. AJ, thank you so much for joining us, and it is a pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right, if you'd like to kick it off, we'd love to know, this is a really interesting journey from Olympian to advocate. Maybe you want to talk us through your background. We'd love to know more about the Olympics, but how does an Olympian become one of the biggest advocates for Israel on US campuses?
Sure, it's a great question. My journey in particularly the last 12 years, but over really the last couple of decades, has been defined through my place, or my perceived place in my own life within the Jewish and Israeli world, where I fit in as a Yid into the overall broader spectrum of why am I here? And when I was about 14, 15 years old, my life was headed in a pretty negative direction. I had no purpose in life. I was very angry with life. I'd been bullied as a kid when I was age 10, 11, 12. It brought a lot of anger into my life. What that ultimately resulted in was kind of a choice by my parents to send me to Israel. And when they sent me to Israel, they just kind of wanted to see if they could break the cycle of negativity that was going on, see if something could be jump started in my life. And something indeed was. It was the summer of 2006 that I went to Israel, and that if people know the Israeli history off the top of their heads, in the summer of 2006, the Second Lebanon War broke out. As a 15-year-old in a bomb shelter the entire summer, it really made an impression on me, and what sort of life I wanted to live if I were to be struck tomorrow, if I were to die tomorrow. It brought with me an amazing connection. It created an amazing connection to Israel, because I had felt that Israel gave me my life back and my life purpose. And therefore I was going to dedicate a lot of my life towards giving something back to the state. It's taken on many different forms over the last number of years. One of them was trying to represent Israel globally or internationally in sport. In post-October 7th, so right before October 7th, we had a team ready to go to start our bobsled season. So October of 2023, we're about to start the bobsled season. Bobsled season always coincides with the Chagim, right? With the Yom Noraim. Like every October, the slate is wiped clean for us. There's no points on the board anymore, and you start anew. So when people always ask, they're like, "Hey, when will you know if you qualified for the Olympic Games?" Like you don't know until the last day, because you could have won the World Championships the year before, but it has no bearing. It's kind of like Rosh Hashanah rolls around and the slate is wiped completely clean. It's the same deal in our sport. But October 7th hit 2 days after I was heading up to Lake Placid to start the season. Immediately, I think everyone remembers what the reaction was to 10-7. Everyone had a different reaction themselves to 10-7. Mine was very much, hey, we got to do something, right? Like we gotta be something now. Like we got to do something and contribute something. And I have been contributing in my own way to the state and to the Jewish people for a good number of years through my representation through sport. But this was different, because all my teammates were headed to war. Right? I was the only person who was born outside of Israel on the team. I moved to Israel when I was 23 plus years old and ineligible at that point to serve in the military. And so I thought, what could be my role? What could be my focus? And so immediately I thought, maybe I'll head out to Washington Square Park in New York, where NYU is based, and hold an open debate. right? Just sit there with a picnic table and hold an open debate about Hamas and Israel and what our role is. Israel had not yet responded to 10/7 in any meaningful way. It issued kind of evacuation orders, to certain areas like, hey, we're going to come and do something, but they hadn't really responded. And I thought, this is going to result in a worldwide pogrom. This is going to, like, every single time, anti-Semitism in my view is very much like a tea kettle with steam, and the steam builds up and it builds up and builds up. And Israel is the permission structure for which people can open that valve, right, to let off their steam of Jew hatred. And because they always try to couch their anti-Semitism and no, they just hate Israel. They have this irrational hatred of Israel. It has nothing to do with Jews. Don't you know they have a Jewish friend who also hates Israel? That to me was kind of the first thought. It's like, hey, we're going to suffer a worldwide pogrom, right? How do I deal with that? What can I do to contribute or fight back from that? And so I went out, sat at a table in Washington Square Park for 8 hours and sat and debated. We got a few good pictures from that debate. And one of them, one of the most amazing pictures I've ever seen of my own self is an Arab-looking man shouting in my face with his finger, raised high. And at that moment, he was shouting about how Hamas was very necessary and very good, and the Jews needed to be dealt with. About a month and a half ago, the photographer who took that photo, he sent me a message. He said, "Dude, I just realized, do you know who that is in the photo?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "That's Mahmoud Khalil and his wife." So that Mahmoud Khalil is the guy who is set for deportation in the United States. It's been a big fight. He was detained at Colombia for supporting Hamas and all this and that. And his claim, of course, is that he didn't support a terror organization. He just hated Israel. Right? Here's this guy 7 days after October 7th shouting in my face. We have a photo of it about how the Jews were evil and Hamas was great. Of course, the premise of the discussion, what was on the paper itself, was Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization, a brutal genocidal terrorist organization who butchers their own citizens, and Israel is a force for good. And he didn't come to debate the Israel is a force for good part. He came to debate the Hamas part. So I'm happy to point people to, it's kind of, you'll have to scroll down the Instagram page for a bit, but even if you were to ever go back to October, I posted these black and white photos in October of 2023. It's such a striking photo. And I wish I could share it easily. It's kind of hard to just share things in Zoom, but perhaps I'll be able to, I don't know how to, I'm seeing the chat. I don't know how to send anything to Rubio. I think a lot of people are trying to send things to the Secretary of State all the time, but I think they have enough evidence to get him out of the country. But it was really striking as well. There's been a lot of moments, I think, fighting for Israel. When you fight, every single one of us who's engaged in the Jewish community, if you're on this chat, engaged in AJA, you are aware as a Yid of the inconsistencies that are parroted in everyday life by the media, by governments, by everyone. This was one that really hit me in the face, right? Because the media, for no other people, it's kind of like the shooting at the DC nightclub. The DC Jewish Museum, not the nightclub. The shooting at the DC Jewish Museum. They led every single news reported it as Israeli diplomats being killed. Right? This guy had no idea that they were Israeli diplomats. He showed up outside of a Jewish event at a Jewish museum for young Jewish professionals, and he emptied 21 bullets, multiple magazines into a Jewish, what he thought was a Jewish couple. So two things are occurring in the aftermath of that, both of which are unprecedented in American political discourse. The first is framing it about where they worked, right? None in the history of the United States has there ever been a racially motivated shooting, and the headline was like 2 Amazon workers shot. Right? It has nothing to do with the shooting, right? The fact that they just happened to work at the Israeli embassy. And so what it did was it transformed the shooting from one which you could say is just pure Jew hatred into some in which people would say, all right, that's a principled political violence. Right? It's an act of political discourse, so to speak. So it really cheapens it and whitewashes it. The second is people love to point out that one of them was not a practicing Jew, which is insane. Right? He thought they were Jews, but it can't be anti-Semitic. One of them wasn't even Jewish. First of all, two things occur with that argument. The first is it completely dismantles the statement that Israel is some sort of Jewish supremacist apartheid regime. Right? There's a guy who's not a practicing Jew, but he's good enough to work at the Israeli embassy. He really, really loves Israel. Like, can't really claim that it's a Jewish supremacist state in that case. Right? There's a lot of internal inconsistencies. The second is that if a guy showed up out of a gay nightclub and pumped 21 bullets into people who he thought were gays, no one would be on television going, well, it can't really be a homophobic attack because one of them was straight. Didn't you know one of them didn't have a boyfriend? Like, it's insane. It's nuts. It's an act of domestic terrorism against Jewish people. So I think that's, all of us on here is to say that we notice a lot of these inconsistencies in our everyday lives. It's very important to be on the front line and combating them, because a lot of times what I've noticed, and it occurs a lot in sport. You notice it a lot in sport. What I take for morning till evening, I'm doing sport and Jewish stuff, right? But for the longest time, I was just doing sport stuff. You take a lot, same thing in your jobs. If you're doing morning till evening something that you're passionate about, the things that you take for granted, other people don't even know. Other people don't realize. And so a lot of times we think that from the advocacy front or refuting lies or things like that is kind of useless because, everyone knows that or no one cares about that. That's simply not true. You're an important voice. Every single Yid, we're only 15 million, 16 million people across the globe, many of us completely unaffiliated and completely disengaged from Judaism, and the next generation becoming increasingly more disengaged. So a lot of times people wonder, like, what can I add to the conversation? Every single time you amplify a refutation of a libel or a lie, you at least give a data point in someone else's mind that this might not exactly be true, right? Don't let the deluge of the big lie hold. It's something that I found of particular relevance since representing Israel, because one thing that you learn, I've held about 12 of these public debates. I've debated for hundreds of hours on Israel, thousands of people. One thing you really learn very quickly about these debates is people just, unless they are steeped in it, unless they really are so passionate about it, they just don't know, right? They don't have enough time in it. We're very small, right? We love to, I think a lot of us fall into this trap that a lot of people know the Jews, focus on the Jews, right? They have perceptions of Jews, but they don't think about Jewish issues. Now, even in the United States, we're 2% of the electorate. Jews love to think that we're a big political concern. I love when people are like, well, Trump is doing something for the Jews because he just wants Jewish help. Bro, Jews are heavily concentrated in New York and Los Angeles, right? New York and Los Angeles aren't voting Republican, aren't voting that way for anything, right? And we fall into this trap a lot of kind of thinking, and it's not disparaging, but the world doesn't care about us, right? It loves to hate on us, but doesn't care about our issues. So that really became very apparent at these tables. Most people stopped by just to listen. They didn't know. And a lot of the questions were relatively, they were innocent, right? A lot of people would say like, hey, I've heard about the indiscriminate bombings. I'll say like, well, the first thing, if you're ever asked about questions like this, where something is pointed and something is framed, I would suggest that you ask them to define the term, right? Because when you make them think, you force them to go deeper into a level that they hadn't yet thought about, because no one has the time in the day to both put food on the table for their families, work their job, care about what they actually truly care about, watch their Netflix or whatever they're going to watch, and then also understand on any sort of deeper level a conflict that has nothing to do with them. Ask them to explain what they mean. Ask them to define the terms that they're using, right? So a lot of times people would say, hey, what about the indiscriminate bombing? I'd say, can you describe that? Can you describe what indiscriminate bombing means to you? And most of the time they'll stutter. They don't even know. They didn't think about it, right? And so once you get a definition, a term, you can dismantle that. I think a lot of times people ask, and at the risk of just pontificating, I hate pontificating. So I'm going to make this last point before someone can actually ask a question or jump in, because I could talk for hours. I mean, that's what Jews do. We love to talk. I think I would have made a great rabbi. Like I could talk for forever. But one of the things that is completely true about debate is that you have to define terms of debate. Right? One of the things that I'm gifted in life at like probably only a couple things, most of which are completely unmarketable and terrible for a young Jewish kid who wants to get married and have a family. First is driving a bobsled. No money in that, not applicable to the workforce at all. The second is political analysis. Really hard to make any sort of money off political analysis. The third is debate. So I'm very proud to say that over the dozen years that I've represented Israel, I've become extremely skilled in debate. And so it's very important. One of the biggest issues when it comes to debating is setting the table, as I call it, framing the debate. You have to frame the parameters, because a couple things could happen if you don't do that. One is you can talk past each other, in which case it's just a waste of your time, right? Why are you even talking? The second is you might not actually be addressing the point that they want to address, in which case it also is a waste of your time. The third is, what is the point of debating? Right? If the point of debating is to move the needle, so to speak. So when I'm sitting out there and I'm having a public debate, the point of the debate is not to change the mind of the person debating me. It's a public debate. The point is to dismantle their arguments, right? Because the people who have enough passion to come up and scream and yell at me, the Mahmoud Khalils, I'm not going to move his needle. I'm just going to be able to poke holes in his inconsistencies so that the people around can say, hey, if he's lying about that, if that doesn't add up, the witness is impeached, so to speak. His testimony is not trustworthy. What else is not accurate? So that's what I would say is number one, whenever you're debating, is you have to frame that debate. You have to set the parameters of debate. And it also avoids the trap of misdirection, right? Most people, when they're caught in the trap that you set for them, or you poke a hole in what you're trying to talk about, they misdirect, right? So you talk about, people talk about starvation in Gaza. They always talk about starvation in Gaza, or aid. Aid is the big one, right? Israel's cutting off the flow of aid, right? The moment you say, okay, what do you mean by cutting off the flow of aid, right? So they have to define that. Most of the times they're not letting aid in. So easy to refute. Israel has let in 3,500 calories per person per day over the course of the conflict, with the exception of the last couple of weeks, right, in which it was trying to choke off Hamas's financial support. Right. You've just impeached their whole point, right? That it doesn't make sense. 3,500 calories a person a day. No one eats that much, right? That's a lot of aid. So what they'll try to do is they'll misdirect from that. Well, I mean, Israel is now killing a lot of people. You got to say, hey, can we focus on that? Can you admit that what you said about the aid is incorrect? So let me stop here. Let me open it up to at least to some questions before I talk your ears off. Please, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand.
Thanks, AJ. That was excellent. So before we go to some audience Q&A, which is going to be led by Alan Friedman, one of the founding members of AJA and the former vice president. Before we do that, we're just going to ask a few questions of our own. And I just want to thank as well Robert Wheel for organizing tonight's talk. So thank you for that, Robert. And also point out that to say your name, you have to say AJA as well. So AJ Edelman has AJA in it, so pretty cool as well.
You would be surprised to know that the nonprofit that we set up. So the team is supposed to be the centerpiece in an example of what we can accomplish in sport. I never got into why I'm in sport, but I don't need to for the purposes of this discussion. But it was to show that Jews really have a place in sport, and we don't invest enough in it. And so I started an organization called AJA, Advancing Jewish Athletics, to get grant money to young kids, to young Jews who want to pursue sport but are financially hamstrung, so they don't end up like me, like in a shoebox in the middle of nowhere in Japan. But whenever people said AJA, I'm like, oh, that's my org. So.
There you go. Wow, the other AJA. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But to start off, go for a bit of a controversial question. Do you have any thoughts on the Azadu Jews, the left-wing Jews that hate their own people, which we have a big problem with in Australia, and you also do on the other side of the world?
They're tzedukim. a lot of people, a lot of Jewish focus is spent on converting people to our cause. It has been nearly exclusive to spending to combat anti-Semitism, so to speak. Combating anti-Semitism, I'm approaching this in a bit of a roundabout framework, so I'm going to get directly to it, but just to set the table here. Jews love to spend money to bring people over to our side, right? We do it with birthright. That's sort of we do it with Hasbara, and we do it with our own people. I believe something like a third of all funds raised for Jewish federations in America, something like that, goes to combating anti-Semitism. Why? Right? All research shows that trying to combat racism only furthers racism. Right? It only creates further division because it creates other classes. Right? There have been a lot of studies about workplace, mandatory anti-racism training. It just fosters distrust and dislike because the people who already don't like you, right? Once you're like, hey, sit down and watch Holocaust stuff and like us, right? It doesn't work, right? It's insane. When it comes to our own, there's a reason. There's a culturally permissive, a socially permissive structure as to why they believe that Jews or Israel is problematic, right? And part of that is anti-authority based, right? They've rejected their own framework of authority. They've rejected Jewish teaching, right? Because Jewish teaching is inherently Zionistic. So we've done something really dangerous in the last, ever since, at least in my lifetime. I don't know how it was before I was alive or before I was self-aware, but I was always taught that Zionism was invented in the late 19th century by a guy named Herzl. That's not true. Zionism is a core Jewish value, a core tenet of the faith. It's enshrined in the liturgy. It informs our holidays. Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, is a core part of almost everything we do. We say it on Shabbos. Being Jewish means being Zionist, right? That is part of Judaism. Political Zionism is just a political movement to realize that in a day and age when political movements were the way to secure your rights, right? When monarchies were falling, when the political activism was a way of obtaining things, right? But we've really removed this to our own detriment. So why do people who are Jewish reject a core Jewish value? They've lost the allegiance to Judaism itself. Judaism to them means something different than Judaism. It means an identity, right? It's a vehicle for their politics most of the time, right? So you see this a lot in leftist Jews in the United States, the Tikkun Olam movement, right? I'm Jewish, and because I'm Jewish, it means loving everyone, and loving everyone means having a heart. Okay, Tikkun Olam, the words after Tikkun Olam are B'malchut Shaddai, are in the kingdom of God, right? You have to focus first on fixing the problems in your own community, right? And they've lost that connection, and so it's wasted effort. In fact, so when I say they're tzeddukim, these are people that the Talmud would be fully on board with social excommunication. They're Jews, but they're antithetical to Judaism. They are a danger to the Jewish faith. They're a danger to the Jewish community. And all the effort you can make in trying to bring them back is wasted effort. They have to come back on their own. They have to realize their own internal inconsistencies. Right? When people turn to a life of crime, when people turn to a life of straying from any derech, they've done so due to either trauma or through their own moral rationalizations. Trying to preach to bring them back is almost always ineffective. They have to repair it themselves. What do we do about as a Jews? You socially excommunicate them. You tell them this is not in line with the Jewish faith. This is not okay, right? In the same way that if you're a Messianic Jew and you came into an Orthodox Jewish temple, an Orthodox synagogue, and demanded to lead davening, a rabbi could go on and say, hey, you're okay as a human. I acknowledge you as a human. I'm not saying you're any less as a human, but you don't fit within the faith. This is not your home. it's very much akin to the early, to the split between Catholicism and Protestantism in the earlier times, right? If there were two different ways of approaching the allegiance to what they thought was God, but they did not fit within each other's community, right? And so it'd be wholly inappropriate for a Protestant to walk into a Catholic church and start to demand to run the place. That's how we have to treat them. Social excommunication, explaining this is not your home, right? This is not for you. It's a danger to our community. If you want to run your own ship, if you want to run your own thing, that's totally chill, but you're a danger to us. You're a danger to our children, right? Allegiance to the faith, or at least a connection to the faith, is critical to the continuation of the faith, to the health of the very community itself. When you start opening the door to people who mean to tear down the faith's core values, you are committing seppuku. You're committing cultural suicide, right? It is itself its own form of toxicity and poison. Do not drink it.
So turning to the other side of politics now, we've seen within the Republican Party a bit of a tug of war going on with the Tucker Carlson wing, and questions about Qatari influence on the Republican side of things. And then we've seen big changes in the relationship between, or potentially big changes in the relationship between Israel and the US, with whether it's the Iran deal or whether it's potentially connected to the Gaza or the hostage deal. So what are your thoughts on what's going on that side of politics, and what's going on between the Trump administration and the Israeli government?
I'm very protective. A lot of people should understand how I approach politics, especially another country's politics when I represent Israel. So I'm kind of like the shut up and dribble sort of person when it comes to when you represent a country's flag, the only relevance you have is because that country allowed you to wear that flag. So so I'm always very careful not to stake out issues where it regards U.S. domestic social policy. So you'll never hear me say I endorse a candidate because I'm Israeli or a Jew. You'll never hear me say I believe in a social issue, whether it's with respect to immigration or abortion, whatever it is. It's not my place. It's inappropriate. I've lost my individuality. As a political commentator, I do comment on policy. The policy of the Trump administration has taken a 180-degree turn from Trump 1.0, right? So if we take Trump 1.0 as the first administration, Trump 2.0 as the second Trump administration, it's staffed by people of completely different values, right? People who have completely different worldviews. And all of them have the same sort of rallying cry of peace through strength. But America First has dominated the discussion in Trump 2.0. And what that means is different for everyone. And I think that lost in a lot of this is you guys, if you ever saw House of Cards, I used to work in legislative politics. House of Cards is when not extremely dramatized, it's accurate. There are political games of thrones that are always being played and rearranging of the deck chairs so that you can capitalize on political situations to elevate your status, elevate your role. And also Trump is a one-term president now, right? He has 3 years left, essentially. He has really 2 years or 1.5 years left to govern. Then he becomes a pretty full lame duck. Another election cycle heats up. People are vying for control and the mantle of MAGA, for lack of a better word. Who's going to lead the Republican Party in the future? There is a very deep internal struggle within the administration where foreign policy goes and what America First means. And we could see that probably Vance on the one side represents a new sort of sphere of influence. America plays within its own sphere of influence, and other people screw off to their own spheres of influence. Rubio is a bit more of the older guard. America has vested interests. It's got to help all its allies and be there presently. The bottom line is that what worked very well in whether you like Trump or dislike Trump, you have to acknowledge the success in the first Trump administration. And the success was Iranian isolationism, right? Boxing them in. It's what he's trying to do with China, right? So he was very proud of his maximum pressure campaign, bankrupting Iran, not letting them have breathing room. And it worked. It really did work. What we're seeing now is about to enter a 6th round of talks on a nuclear deal facilitated by Qatar, a state adversarial bank of terror. This is the opposite of maximum pressure Iran containment. And by all indications, until Senate Republicans really put their foot down, wrote open letters, and indicated that they were not going to accede to any sort of nuclear deal that allowed Iran any sort of domestic uranium enrichment, the administration was open to it. I think people lost in what is said is people don't focus in politics on what is not said. If you take a look at the American rhetoric, it is Iran will never have a nuclear bomb. Right? Will never have a nuclear weapon. Right? Okay, Iran says themselves that they're not trying to get a nuclear weapon. Right? But what does that mean? So Israel's position is Iran should have no nuclear enrichment capability. Right? They shouldn't be able to they shouldn't have the capacity to enrich at all. The United States administration is desperate for a deal. It really is desperate for a deal. What motivates a lot of Trump's policy with this is he's very protective of his record of not increasing U.S. engagement in hostile conflict. He ran on that. No more boots on the ground. America pulling out from conflicts, from direct conflict. He's extremely protective of non-direct engagement and brokering deals. He's a deal maker. Here's the problem with that. Iran terrorists don't hold to deals, right? Terrorists wait you out. Terrorists are liars, right? The JCPOA, he rightly called in his first term, the worst deal potentially in the history of mankind. And the US is spiraling towards JCPOA light. The Oman proposal, which Iran rejected, by the way, but the Oman proposal was a 6-month pause on uranium enrichment, at which point they could negotiate going forward. What does that do? It allows money to flow back into the Iranian economy, lifts sanctions, allows them to rebuild their defensive capacity, which Israel completely castrated them of when it struck their air defense systems. This is bad policy. I can go on the record and say, this is, from an Israeli standpoint, this is terrible, bad policy. Right? Engaging in the Iranians, as they have completely indicated, at every single point, they will not give up domestic uranium enrichment. And there's a very simple reason for it. Becoming a nuclear power tips the entire scales in your favor in a regional conflict. And we could see this from the Russia conflict. Why has the West been somewhat restrained in what it has allowed Ukraine to do, or the support it's provided Ukraine? Because Russia is nuclear, right? Because even though Russia is somewhat of a paper tiger, Russia could not survive a World War III. We can see that now. It just throws people towards the front lines to die. It's the sort of, it's a sort of, fighting off the German strategy, but they're running, they just throw people into the wood chipper, but that's no way to win a modern war. But we can't go too far into Russia, because Russia has a crazy dude in charge, or a tactically crazy dude in charge with nukes, right? Imagine the Ayatollahs with nukes. Right. And so this is actually a huge problem that I think Trump has not fully internalized, but it might not be Trump. Trump is very focused on Asia. Trump is very Asia first. He wants to contain China. It's a very smart move. It's very important. But the people who are negotiating in his stead, and I'm looking specifically at Steve Witkoff here, Steve Witkoff is completely in the pockets of Qatar. His Park Lane Hotel was bought out to the tune of $630 million a number of years ago. He's completely pro-Qatar. He was strung along by Hamas early on in the administration, which he admitted to. He's a weak player, right? He has done nothing of any significance. He has not brokered any good deals. He's also the negotiator when it comes to Russia, and they still haven't come to the table. It's bad policy. The U.S. is pursuing presently bad policy with respect to Iran.
Now, I could go on, but I think I can see there's so many people have their hands up, so people want to hear questions from people other than me. So just before we go to Alan with questions, I'll just tell you, for next week, we've got a very exciting topic coming up with Dr. Anjali Pandava. We're going to be hearing about her journey leaving Islam, and I can see she's here with us in this Zoom as well. Journey leaving Islam, and what the Jewish people and Israel, what lessons we can learn from that. So very much looking forward to that. And over to Alan to lead Q&A.
Thanks, Robert, and hi everybody. And Julie's with us today, so let's let her ask the first question. So, and Julie, please ask your question of AJ. Please unmute and then ask your question. And Julie, you need to unmute.
Okay,
That's
okay. Thank you. I was just saying, I think it's a little bit unfair because I think I was the last one to put my hand up, but I'm going to go with it anyway. My question for AJ was, and thank you very much for the thought-provoking presentation. Is you said something quite powerful about the diaspora Jews. This is not your home if they do not support Israel. This is not your home. I wonder whether if you transfer that same thought into Israel directly and all the Jewish people in Israel who do not support Israel, would you say that same thing to them?
I would. So there's a difference between not supporting Israel and not supporting the basis of the existence of the state of Israel, right? So not supporting Israel could be a necessary disapproval with secular government policy, or the intertwining of how religious you want Israel to be, if you want it to be somewhat more religious or less religious, and what it represents to you, right? What Israel represents to people is there's a lot of difference in what Israel represents to people. And I'll say, like, from my family, I have a left-leaning brother. I have a rather famous left-leaning brother, Alex. He's a famous comedian. What Israel means to him is a far more pluralistic, far more, we all love each other sort of version of the place. But he believes in the right of the existence of the state. And that and healthy open debate is the cornerstone of Judaism, right? The Talmud is predicated on that. There is very healthy open debate intellectually, and public debate, a fierce public debate between the different Rebbeim and Gedolim of their times as to what direction Judaism took. But they all at least agree on the very core nature of Judaism, right? The view that Israel is a home for Jews is indispensable. It is essentially the heart of Judaism. You cannot remove the heart from a body and expect the body to live, right? And so if there are enemies within Israel, if there are certain Satmar kind of people who are like, hey, we don't even support the existence of the state, make it, because it shouldn't come until Mashiach, that is also cause for social excommunication, 100%, because any movement that starts to you've seen this in the Jewish community itself, and it's only gotten bigger. Right? This anti-Zionism problem has only gotten bigger because once you start to stray from core values, once you open core values of any movement to movement across the plane, to open interpretation, to open question as to whether they are actual core values, you remove the identity of the movement itself. It no longer is the movement. And so that's just on a movement, but think about it on what has binded Jews together throughout the centuries is a common culture, right? We can talk about different languages that have been spoken, different customs that have been had in terms of different kashrut or different laws, right? The Shulchan Aruch, or who do we hold by. What has bound Jews together is the common culture of Judaism. And Zionism, the concept of Israel as the home of Jews, is indispensable as part of that culture. Once you remove that culture, the threads start to untangle from Judaism, from the Jewish people. Am Yisrael is an essential. I've always said that Israel is not, it's not my thought, it's just how I phrase the common Jewish thought. Israel is incomplete without the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are wholly incomplete without Israel. The two are not themselves without each other.
Okay, thank you very much. Anthony, you had your hand up, so please unmute and ask questions. Just a reminder, everybody, please keep the questions very brief. Anthony, you need to unmute. Still working it out? Okay, just while you're doing that, AJ, I wanted to ask you
You hear me now?
about. Okay, yes. Okay, fire away, Anthony.
Okay. You mentioned very correctly, and thank you for your contribution thus far, there's a lot to agree with in it. But in the debate that you were talking about, you were focused on beating the person that you were debating, or was it the people that were surrounding you? Now, I say this because in the world we live in, we rely on that person, people who are surrounding you. They're called the media. And it's no use ducking the fact that the media play a huge role in what the people you're talking to is going to be printed and how they react. So how do you find that as you go around now to the so-called democratic countries, and you're very pro-Israel at the moment with very logical arguments? I mean, you can't argue against the fact that the person holding a knife and stabs someone off is the guilty one and the victim is the... So what I'm saying is, how do you treat them?
How do I treat the media?
Well, if you happen to be speaking to, the British Prime Minister, Canadian, uh, Italian, whatever, are you aiming to knock down that person's argument to defeat the person, or for the media to write down what you're saying?
So the media is becoming an increasingly smaller share in the influence of people's thought process formation. It still plays a very prominent role because you're bombarded by media and people clip it and they put it online. But increasingly, people have become very tribalistic in the media that they consume. Right? People have really self-segregated into, if you're, I'll use, I don't know I guess I would say I only know Sky from Australia, but if you're on the right, you might watch Sky. If you're on the left in the United States, you'd watch MSNBC. There's two different kinds of analysis or points that I put out. The first is in person, the second is online. The purpose of the online posts are to put another dot so that when people are scrolling through we scroll through social media in somewhat of a dead brain fashion. It passes our eyes, we digest the information, and it becomes one of many data points, right? Even if we read a very thought-provoking thought, it exists to challenge something, and then we actually forget the actual wording or the post a day later or even an hour later. The purpose of the online stuff, of the online advocacy, is to put a dilution effect into the water, so to speak, so that when people, because most of the media, I think it was something like 75% of social media was just anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist. And so when you don't throw out pro-Israel stuff, the concentration of media consumed, it's not to change the media, but it's the makeup of the water, so to speak, that people are consuming so that their body is poisoned less quickly, right? They're going to consume images and thoughts and sounds. You need to just present another point to buffer it. Even if it's a nothing thought, even if you think it's not a hard-hitting thought, the fact that it's one less, they're seeing that rather than something else is already a victory. The in-person stuff is far more impactful and effective because if someone has taken the time out of their day, if you're on your phone scrolling, you just oftentimes have nothing else to do, right? It's boredom a lot of times, right? It's time filler. If you're actively engaged through your normal everyday activity, it's someone actually making a direct choice. Hey, I'm spending time on this. I'm thinking about this. I'm going to stop here and listen. I could be doing other things. I had somewhere to be. I'm okay standing here instead. At that point, the direct dismantling is very effective because their brain is in a mode to digest information, to analyze information. Very few people go onto social media to analyze. They go onto social media to get a dopamine hit, to feel better. right? It's why we all love to see that people liked our stuff. They like our stuff. They see someone liked it. It gives a dopamine release. There's amazing studies from in the early days of Facebook as to how teenagers were conditioned to just throw stuff out there, their selfies, whatever they would, to get the dopamine hit of people hitting the like button, right? It doesn't require any thought other than, it's like when I scratch my dog's head, it's like drugs to him, right? He's just feeling good. He doesn't know anything other than the fact that he's feeling good. So two different things, right? Two very different reasons. The online stuff is, and the more that we can perpetuate our own agenda, so to speak, for lack of a better word, online, it becomes very powerful because people they do self-segregate in their mass media, right? They will watch only channels that they agree with, talking heads that they want reassurance from. But when it comes to online, that's when you get the ability to kind of insert yourself into their hamster wheel, so to speak. And the algorithm tries its hardest to reinforce an echo chamber because that reinforces engagement. When you get pissed off online, you either engage really hard, it gets you upset, or you chuck your phone against the wall, for lack of a better word. You're like, I get angry, right? Like, so anger creates engagement, but self-righteous anger is what keeps you online. Just pissed off anger makes you want to stop, right? It's the opposite of the dopamine hit. So people get good feelings when they see someone agree with them politically on the television. That's why they watch their programs. That's why they'll never watch an opposing program. They don't want to hear the opposite, right? People in the United States still don't want to hear that Joe Biden had dementia. Joe Biden had dementia, right? But no one wants to hear that. So it's not being talked about on the left-wing station. So that, I guess, I don't want to cut into time too much, but I hope that did answer the question.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. Just before we go to Jeff, I wanted to ask you about anti-Semitism in your sport, particularly since October 7. Just before I do that, I would say that Australia is a sunburned country. I don't think anybody knows much about bobsledding. I doubt that there's even a bobsled in the whole country. So what we've seen on TV
there is.
are a bunch of you guys in Spider-Man outfits, and you push your sled off the hill and then you jump into it. And what happens after that? I mean, is it the quickest time to the bottom? And what are you guys actually doing while you're sort of hurtling down the mountain?
Very good, very smart. A lot of people ask, like, hey, well, what is the relevance of bobsled to an Israeli? And I always say it's the most Israeli sport. You need balls of steel, for lack of a better word. You need a David and Goliath, this sort of thing. You need to go up against the rest of the world, and you're put constantly in a deadly situation for which you got to come out alive on the other side. So I really think it is a very Israeli sport. Similar to Australia, we have a team. Australia has two teams now, actually. They used to get a free spot at the games for being an unrepresented continent. So Australia has a unique advantage when it comes to the Olympics. It along with New Zealand and like one or two little islands, get a lot of free spots in the games for what they call the universality rule. They're Eurasia or they're Oceania, right? That's the Oceania thing. And they're a lot better funded than New Zealand. So it's almost always going to Australian athletes, but they're actually amazing athletes in their own right. AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, does amazing work. Very, very good. Now, as to what we're doing, you're exactly right. It's a fastest combined time over two heats. So we go down in, let's say, 50 seconds or 50.05 seconds, and the next person goes down in 50.07 seconds. So we're 200ths ahead of him, right? We're 200ths faster than him. Then we do it again, and the lowest combined time wins. It's incredibly resource intensive. The reason Israel, there's only a couple of things in my life that I've ever said I'm good at. I'm a by nature incredibly pessimistic, and I've lived with a major depressive disorder through my entire life. Not my entire life, since age 10. Since I was bullied back when I was a teen, I developed major depressive disorder. It's called drug resistance. So drugs don't work with it. You just got to deal with it. gotta learn how to just manage it. But what that means is essentially there's a lot of negative thought cycles in the head. So almost never, and I think it's very good for Olympians, right? Olympians are never satisfied with their own performance. So I'm always saying, like, I can get better. I'm so bad at this, whatever it is. There's only been a couple of things in my life that I've said that I've ever truly good at, that Hashem wanted me to be good at. One of them is driving a bobsled. I am a top 10 in the world driver of a bobsled in the history of our sport. No one has been in both skeleton and bobsled combined, both as proficient in two different sliding sports as I ever have. So, so I'm very proud of it. What we miss, the reason Israel is not a medal contender is Formula One. It's very similar to Formula One, is a resource-based sport. Right? If you don't have an $120,000 car, right? If we're in the 10-year-old, 15-year-old sled that we bought for 20,000, it's like showing up to a Formula One race in a Toyota Prius, right? So we just don't have the money, we don't have the funds, and Israel doesn't fund it. So that's what we do. It's a very Israeli journey. We're kind of, I've always found the cheapest place to live in the world, the most remote area, and hunkered down and, lived on protein powder and eggs and rice. But I'm very proud to say that I made the games in 18 in skeleton, and we always have to say when, because that's a positive thought process. When we make the Olympics in 2026, it will be the first time Israel has ever had a multi-sport Olympian. So very happy with it, very hopeful about it. In the post 10-7 world especially, we've really killed it. You asked about anti-Semitism in the sport. Post 10-7, pre 10-7, I think post 10-7, the people in the sport are very careful about what they say, because if you get a violation for any reason, you could be knocked out of your Olympic dreams. Right? So people are very, very careful. In my first Olympic run into 2018, there was a real anti-Semite who's still in skeleton from Ghana. And he said a lot of anti-Semitic stuff to me. But I believe Jews are victors, not victims. And I was never going to bring this, the best way to beat an anti-Semite is to kick his ass at his own game, right? The moment you complain, the moment you make it a victim story, they win, right? So I never brought it up until after the games, right? Until I was like, hey, this dude's a piece of shit. He's a bad dude. But he's still there, still blatantly anti-Semitic. I did leave sport for 2 years. I fell into a pretty deep depression after the 2018 Olympics, not in small part because at the Olympic Games, a jury member, there's a 3-person jury in our sport at every race. They get to be king over the race. They can invent rules. It's in the rule book that they can just invent rules on the spot. He said he was going to disqualify a piece of equipment of mine that was pretty critical to my performance. I said, there's no basis to it. Right. So he had been told that it was legalized by this Ghanaian guy. This Ghanaian guy, his coach went to them and said, the only reason Edelman stuff is legal is because the Israelis are super connected. Don't you know? Like the Israelis are super connected in sport. And so, it's the classic Jewish trope. We got our hands and everything. And so they disqualified. And I said, there's no rule in the rule book that says that this is an illegal piece of equipment. It's right there. It's legal. It was ruled legal in 3 different races. And the guy said, Herr Edelman, a very thick German accent, Herr Edelman, you people make all the rules, but not today. And, it really hit hard, right? Especially at the Olympic Games, it impacted my performance. But I grew from that, right? So I think that the only proper response to anti-Semitism, I think we deal with anti-Semitism wrong in many cases. Anti-Semites are anti-Semites. And a lot of the times I really pity anti-Semites, right? Because to go around, to live a life in which someone else lives rent-free in your head so much that you're filled with the compulsion to act out, to be angry, you have to have a crap life, right? You have to have a terrible existence, right? I'm very happy that I don't go around, even Palestinians, I'm chill with, right? I'm totally chill with them. I hate Hamas. I hate people who hate me. But it's not like I walk down the street and I'm like, Palestinian, right? People walking down the street like, fucking Jews, right? Sorry for the language. Like, that's a really bad life. So I think, that's how I pretty much respond to it. And anytime there's anti-Semitism in the sport is, you know what? He's just pissed because I'm kicking his ass, right? And not only am I kicking his butt, it's amazing. Israel was such a laughing stock in sliding sport for the longest time because we have no money, right? So if we have no money, we have no car, we have no performance, right? I'm one of the best now. And everyone, when I walk into a changing room, they're looking at videos of me in the track, right? I know they're studying what we call my racing lines, right? They always have coaches at corners watching Israel go, right? And that to me is amazing. You should feel empowered. When someone is anti-Semitic, you should feel empowered, right? Because why do bullies bully? They try to take a rope and pull themselves up by pulling you down, right? They're not punching down at you. They're trying to punch up, right? So there is a lot of anti-Semitism in my sport, a lot of anti-Semitism in sport in general, but I really take it as a positive. It never gets to me. I always like, you know what? It's going to make him really freaking pissed when I kick his butt tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, please unmute and ask your question. Jeff, you're not unmuted. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Trump Mark II is clearly against so-called useless wars, or whatever he calls it, but that doesn't rule out the fact that he's also promised that he will not stop Netanyahu and or United States with cooperation destroying the nuclear facility of Iran. Surely that is not necessarily, as you said at the beginning of the program, that Trump Mark II is de facto a peacenik. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I don't think Trump is a peacenik. There's a difference between so a peacenik is someone who's like more of a pacifist, who actually believes at least that's what I would take it. Like they kind of like the people who are like all Gazans just want to live in peace. They all just want peace with us. Like that's a peacenik. It's a misguided worldview. I think what guides Trump's I think oftentimes people forget Trump is an 80-year-old man who's a multi-billionaire who's lived the most interesting life perhaps in the history of humankind. Nearly assassinated twice, won the presidency in non-consecutive terms, is richer than God. What does a man at that stage of his life have left? It's legacy, right? What defines him when he's gone? From the role, from the earth, what's left of him? He doesn't, this is what gets, if anyone ever tells me Trump just wants to enrich himself, he just wants a few more dollars in the bank, my brain shuts off. He doesn't need a few more dollars in the bank. He doesn't need $10, right? It's like you stopping on. It's like you trekking across town to pick up a penny, right? Any of us. It's inconsequential. What matters to a man of that status, of that time, is a legacy, right? So what is Trump's legacy? And Trump's legacy is as a deal maker and as a peacemaker. He really wants the Nobel Prize, and as someone who kept America out of foreign conflict. All three of those play into it. So he's not a peacenik. He just doesn't want to be dragged into conflict. And I think that plays very heavily on his decision making. The people who are around him are, the job of the presidency is too big to set the table for every meal, right? So you have to be reliant, you have to trust. The reason the people are in the administration is because they have a certain position of trust. Trump trusts them, right? And so he'll trust their advice. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a position of prominence in the administration. So clearly he trusts Witkoff. Right. So I don't make this about Trump. I make this about Trump's point man in the region, which is Witkoff. Witkoff is misguided. Witkoff is incorrect in his view of the Qataris. Right. Witkoff clearly does not understand the role of dictators. Right. Because that's the reason he hasn't been able to successfully bring Russia to the table. I think we've seen Trump get very pissed off at Putin in the last couple of days because now he's realized the American people can understand Russia, the Russia conflict, in a way that is much harder to understand the Iran conflict. Russia conflict is very one-dimensional to Americans. Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia's the bad dude. Trump is potentially a Russian stooge according to 50% of the population. He's not, but 50% of them were told for the longest time that he was, right? So Trump is getting upset at Putin because Putin has strung Witkoff out for months, right? Trump tells Zelensky to jump, and Zelensky asks how high, right? Trump says, be in Turkey for peace talks. Zelensky shows up to Turkey for peace talks, and Putin does not, right? Trump says, we want a mineral deal. Trump gets his mineral deal. Yes, he insulted Trump in the White House. Yes, he threw a hissy fit and tried to get American security guarantees. But at this point, it's very hard to argue that Zelensky is not doing pretty much exactly what the administration is telling him to do, and Putin's not. Putin's not coming to the table. So Trump feels, I believe, I'm not inside his brain, but I think the working understanding would be Trump feels that he's publicly getting strung out, right? He's publicly getting hung out to dry. And this doesn't look very strong, right? It doesn't look like a strong, decisive individual. So he's getting pissed at Putin. He's not getting pissed at the Iranians or Qataris, because his point man in the region has not only assured him that they're going to that they can potentially get a deal done, right? All we heard from Trump a couple weeks ago is, I think we're close to a deal tomorrow, the next day. Of course, we're not close to a deal. He trusts Witkoff. Witkoff is wrong. But he also is not running against the clock in the same way that the Russia conflict is. He promised the American people when he ran that he was going to end the Russia war in like 24 hours. Right? There's a promise there. He actually made a concrete, a firm, something to point to that congressional Democrats can point to in the next election and say, hey, this guy sold you a bill of goods, right? Like, he's wrong. So no, Trump is not a peacenik, but Trump's people who are surrounding him, including Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, she was a Qatari lobbyist. She got paid $1 million a year to promote, pretty much garbage. So I don't think there's also not enough attention about it from the right. I think the right was correctly and appropriately concerned with the influence peddling from the Biden family. The Biden family undoubtedly enriched themselves over the course of his presidency and time as a vice president or senator, absolutely enriched themselves. But the Trump family is open. It's in this. Okay, we don't have to go into it, but they were concerned about that, but they somehow are seemingly unconcerned with the fact that we are cozying up to people who are giving us gifts, right? People who are giving us a rogue state actor giving the American Air Force a $400 million jet is a problem, right? And there's an inconsistency there. That comes down, I think, to a lot of the realization that Trump also has that the American electorate is very tribal, and they will give him rope when he needs to have rope. People on the right, his base, will give him rope where he needs rope. And people who weren't going to give him rope, they wouldn't give him rope even if he solved global peace. So does that at least, I know you're dissatisfied with the answer, but does it at least address the premise of the question? I don't want to leave the question on the table, please. I mean, you're free to disagree for sure. I'm just one voice.
No, I think you've done very well, AJ. We'll have to leave it there because we have gone a little bit over time, but we did start late. Just before we leave, AJ,
I am happy to stay on if you'd like, Alan. I am happy to stay on. I only have training for the rest of the evening, and I keep Israel hours. I'm up for another like 12 hours.
No, that's okay. We do try to keep our sessions fairly close to time. AJ, just tell people how they can best follow you.
So you can best follow me on Instagram or X. So on X, it's real AJ Edelman. On Instagram, it's AJ Edelman. If you want to know more about the bobsled team, feel free to follow Israel Bobsled, or just, Alan can send out an email with, link about the bobsled team. I will say, just because it flashed on the right side that someone said that Trump is playing the long game, I try to be as objective as possible in my political analysis. And one of those has been particularly to be harsh on the Trump, just before we go, because I think it's an important point. The voters don't owe politicians slack, right? The only information that you're privy to is what they've allowed you to be privy to. And you have to play with the information that you're given, right? It's not for us, it's not for the voters to invent motivations for politicians that they themselves don't tell you, right? And so it's kind of two things where this is directly applicable in our lives. The first is Trump's tariff stuff, right? So the best thing you could say about tariffs is that they were a negotiating tool to try to have everyone bring their tariffs down to zero. Okay, it flew until Vietnam offered to bring their tariffs down to zero, and Trump was still like, okay, you're still getting stuck with a 10% tariff, right? Okay, so then that motivation, that reasoning for a tariff is gone, right? You cannot invent a motivation that isn't there. On the Trump, Qatar, Iran stuff, there's been a lot of Zionist voices, especially, who have invented motivations for this foreign policy that would only fly if we want to believe it, right? So one of those is 4D chess, playing the long game, things like that. Okay, what is the 4D chess? So we have to be objective. What was the 4D chess about the American administration saying that essentially the Houthis could do whatever the hell they wanted to fire missiles over Saudi airspace into, at Tel Aviv, just so long as they didn't touch American ships, right? What's the 4D chess of that? It was a SOP to the Iranians and the Qataris, right? Like, let's call it what it is. The second is the aspect of the long game. Dictators can play the long game. A term limited president who has a midterms coming up in 16, 15 months, there's no long game there, right? The longer the Iranians play the game, the more they can rebuild capacity. So I'd caution, this is not a direct argument against, the long game. it's just, I think that Americans, Jews in general, like I think just Jews in general, we tie ourselves to politicians when it's the politicians who should tie themselves to us. We give a lot of rope to them when their responsibility, our responsibility is not to carry water for them. Their responsibility is to fulfill. If they do a good job, they deserve no praise. That's the entire reason they were elected, right? That they don't deserve extra praise for doing the good thing. So I personally, it makes me feel a little sad when I see like the Middle East policy does not seem to be going in the right direction. Right? There's no reason to have a sixth round of talks. Right? The Iranians clearly are not going to hold by an agreement. Right? They didn't hold by the JCPOA. They enriched tritium during the entirety of that. That was a purely military use. So be cautious. I'm not calling anyone out, but I'm saying be cautious when we start inventing motivations for things that themselves have no basis in a politician saying it. Right? We're just inventing it for them, because what it does is it creates a fealty to the politician that blinds us to our own needs. Our own needs, we're a minority community. A minority community has to fight for recognition and political realization of what they want to occur. And nowhere is this more true than for the Jewish community, because we represent such a small portion of the electorate. What is our value to politicians most often? It's money. Right? Politicians don't need our vote. We're not a sizable share of the vote. They need our money, because money buys votes. Money buys votes in the form of media buys. Money buys votes in the form of rallies. They need Jewish money. And so we have to fight for our own political concerns. And when we see something that doesn't seem to be going our way, such as the Houthi thing, I was very harsh on Trump for the Houthi thing. Right? The moment Israel and the Americans took out the airport in Yemen and was clobbering the Houthis, and then all of a sudden Trump is like, you know what, we're out. We're done with the Houthi thing. You go do what you want to Israel, but we're done with that. Wrong. It was inappropriate. It was hanging an ally out to dry, and we should have called him out for it. I don't play this 4D chess game, right? Because it's not our job to play the 4D chess game. So I don't want to string it out too much, but just be very careful into marrying ourselves to politicians, because I think that the history of Jews has shown, this is my big social issue before 10/7 was trying to break the cycle of Jews using Judaism for their political beliefs rather than the other way around. Right? Is Jews are nomadic because they get kicked out of everywhere. Right? They get kicked out of places that they feel comfortable. So having a fealty or a love of a foreign politician, I'm going to call anyone who's not Israeli, of a foreign-based politician, is irrational from the Jewish standpoint, because they have historically, it doesn't pan out. It doesn't work. Right? If they did well for you, if they did good for you, good. You should have expected them to do good for you. The question is, what have you done for me lately? Right? So I don't love being like, he was good in Trump term 1. Okay, he was great in Trump term 1. What's he going to do for me now? Because now is a totally different world than Trump term 1. So just be careful of it going forward.
Okay, thank you, AJ. I think that whenever your bobsled career ends, you've got a fantastic career as a political commentator waiting. So I think we've all enjoyed you very much today, and we wish you much hatzlacha, much success in whatever you do. Thank you for joining us. Thank you also again to Robert Wheel for arranging it. We look forward to seeing everybody next week. So for now, it's a very good night to you all. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me, guys.